Notre Dame is a enormous underdog, which I would love to know had they performed better against Clemson in the ACC championship game. There was so much respect given to Notre Dame by many coming off the win against Clemson in South Bend, and then it just seemed to turn in a complete opposite direction based on that performance, and now we see the result being a 20-point spread against Alabama.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously the performance against Clemson certainly plays a role. Obviously, I think Florida was a 17-point underdog against Alabama in the SEC championship game. I think Notre Dame probably would have been a little bit lower than that going into the game without the loss against Clemson. So I mean that probably shows you right there. Other than that, though, I mean the fact that this is a 20-point spread or 19.5, whatever it is, really shows the parity or the lack of parity in college football these days. Because Notre Dame this whole season leading up to that Clemson game, a lot of people had a lot of respect for them, especially after the first time they played Clemson on November 7th and ended up winning. And now they're I think it's the biggest dog in playoff history, which is crazy to me because I don't think Notre Dame's the worst team to make the Final Four. So yeah, no, it's certainly interesting. I think Alabama and then a healthy Clemson team are above the rest of college football right now, at least this year. I'm hoping to keep the game close more than anything, I guess.
Yeah, a couple other teams come to mind when I think worst playoff team in the 7-year run of the college football playoff. Got Nathan Erbach on the line. Please like, comment, share the videos on social media. Subscribe right here at MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. Best discussion, debate, and analysis. That's our mission. That's our goal every day. There is a class distinction and a argument over class distinction in college football like no other sport. I think for a number of reasons. We won't go into those, but we'll talk about the class distinction. So for a lot of people, it's Alabama, Clemson, then another tier. For some people, it's Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, another tier. Some people base it on talent. Some people base it on recent championships, performance, some combination of the two. Notre Dame has reached a number of big games. They have lost basically all of them in recent memory. They have performed better in some of them recently, i.e. Georgia on the road last year, Georgia at home a few years ago, and Georgia came that close to winning a national championship. And of course, earlier this year, breaking through and winning in overtime, regardless of what the evaluation is of Clemson's roster on the field that day. So your thought process about the talent gap between Alabama and Notre Dame?
I mean, it's certainly there. I mean, just look at recruiting rankings and you'll see that Alabama signs, 4 or 5 stars every year. Notre Dame's lucky to sign one, if any. And then, you bring that into the top 50, top 100. Alabama's, more of a football factory at this point, and Notre Dame's, they pride themselves on, being a good football program, but also preparing kids for, other avenues down the road. And that's not to suggest that other programs don't. And Alabama certainly has, successful, kids that graduate from the football program and go on to do good things that aren't in football. But Notre Dame is kind of known for their academics and different things like that, and it's a little bit harder to get into the school even as an athlete. So I think that plays a role. But no, I mean, other than that, I mean, I really think that there's a couple programs above the rest. Alabama's one of them, and while I think since maybe the 2012 championship game against Alabama, I think Notre Dame has become a better program overall. I also think Alabama's become a better program overall. So I don't even know if I want to say that Notre Dame's closed the gap per se. I just think both programs have consistently gotten better through this 10-year stretch or so. And it's kind of an interesting dynamic on that front.
Yeah, if you just look at sheer talent and you're going to go with recruiting rankings, then you've got a top 4 in some order. I don't even think there's necessarily an order. Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, and actually Georgia would be in the argument if you're just talking about sheer recruiting rankings and putting the roster on paper. And then as you transition that to results on the field, then Georgia drops off. Ohio State's an argument as to whether they drop off and are their own tier in a sense. But Notre Dame has certainly upgraded the program under Brian Kelly. And, the first thing, Nathan, people think about when they think talent gap typically is speed. They think about speed and athleticism. Notre Dame has produced tremendous tight end play down through the years. That up until the current two that are on the roster right now. But they think of outside speed, and Notre Dame's obviously also produced tremendous wide receiver talent, but they seem to be big body guys that high point the football, that box guys out and play that role, not necessarily speed guys. You were touting a couple speed guys in the offseason as maybe taking the top off the defense, being that next dimension of Notre Dame wide receiver, but it hasn't necessarily worked out because of injuries and so forth.
Right. Yeah. Kevin Austin's missed the entire season for the most part. He was a guy that kind of had the best of both worlds. He was a little bit bigger body, but also could stretch the field. And then Braden Lindsey's been dealing with a hamstring all season. So that's obviously hasn't really helped the narrative in that sense. I think with Notre Dame, team speed is so much better than it was in 2012, but a lot of that has to do with the defensive side of the ball. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah is just a different type of linebacker than, say, like a Manti Te'o, even though Manti Te'o was an incredible, college football player and throughout his career. Guys like Kyle Hamilton, who is one of the 5 stars that they've signed over the last year. I mean, he's just a different type of athlete than they've had on that side of the ball. But you're right. I mean, I think where Notre Dame really it's a strength of their team, but it's also, I was talking to I think it was actually John on Always Irish the other day about this. And I think the big bodied receivers go up and catch the 50-50 balls, make it essentially a 90-10 ball a lot of the time, works against a lot of the teams that Notre Dame should beat. And as we can see, they've pretty much beaten everybody they should beat over the last, 3 or 4 years. But what it doesn't do is beat the teams that are bringing in better talent than Notre Dame. So having guys on a consistent basis like a Will Fuller, I think will go a long way for Notre Dame if they can start bringing in some wide receivers and some other skill position talent that can really stretch the field. And instead of methodically going down the field, taking off 5, 6 minutes, 8 minutes off the clock, which is really hard to do on a consistent basis, they need guys that can go up and catch a 60-yard pass and score a touchdown, and have drives like that.
You have to wonder what the ACC championship game did to the team's psyche, knowing what they did at South Bend, hearing all the noise about Trevor Lawrence not being there and 3 defensive starters, and then going out, and had they lost by a touchdown, that would have been one thing, but losing by 24 points and it not being a game into the second half, whether that, regardless of what they're saying, is hurting their psyche going into this game.
I've kind of wondered about that too. Part of me thinks, obviously maybe they just are a shell of themselves from the entire season and they fold up and, they get blown out again. And in reality, the narrative doesn't change. But I guess at that point, it doesn't really matter because, what's to lose? You'd rather be in the college football playoff and lose and keep the same narrative because it really doesn't do anything to play somebody else that you would probably beat in a normal bowl game. But then the other part of me thinks this is the first time in one of these big games, at least going into it, because they're fresh off a loss against a really good Clemson team, where they don't really have like the "we belong here" attitude. And so now they need to prove that they belong there. I think going into the Clemson game, they thought that they belonged because they beat them the first time around. They were undefeated. 2012, they were undefeated going into Alabama. Same with 2018 against Clemson and against some of these other opponents that they've played in big bowl games over the last 10 or so years. Now it's a little bit of a different story. They just got hammered, and the team, was embarrassed, I guess, to a certain extent on national television, and now they want to go and prove that they can belong instead of believing that they belong to a certain extent. And I don't know if that's going to show on the football field. I think a lot of the times, people want to prove they belong and they get blown out anyway. But at least from a Notre Dame perspective, it is a little bit different than what they've had in the past. So I wonder if they're able to take that and do something a little bit different.